Right, it's time for a LeBron James swing analysis. Obviously, not someone who's super invested into golf. It's very rare that we see his golf swing, but I do want to talk about it because I actually think it's quite impressive for a novice. I think there's a lot of really good going on here. If there is anything to nitpick about his setup, it's really 2 points. Shoulder line quite open, feet line quite closed. When your upper and your lower body are not aligned with each other, it is going to be difficult for most recreational golfers to try to match that up and sync everything later on in the golf swing. And if anything, a little too much anterior tilt of his pelvis here. So the rear end really up and back. In my opinion, that's going to put a lot of pressure on the lower back, make it very difficult to rotate, which is something that we see with his golf swing. As he takes this club back here, obviously not a lot of hinge. So what's going to happen is the club is going to struggle to leverage up and in the air. If we don't hinge it very well, our hand path oftentimes is going to stay pretty low and around the body. He does keep his forearms closed early on, which does manage the club face quite well. But obviously, because he's not hinging it very well and he kind of restricts his hip turn, it's hard to just lengthen the backswing beyond this point. So what ends up happening is that his hands get quite deep. So he has a lot of hand depth by this point, which in my opinion is a little too extreme, especially considering how much he retains, flex in the trail knee. His right hip stays quite internal. But obviously it's not the worst position we've seen, but it could be much more efficient. So from here, very common reaction from someone whose hand path is very, very inside and very short in the backswing is you're going to see an aggressive pushing outward of the hand path in transition. Now, that does allow him to manage the shaft angle quite well. When you are applying a force to the hands this way, it's going to help to keep the club shallow-ish, let's call it. Now, the problem is at this point here, he's lost all of the ability to control the club face, because the only reason the face angle was closed in the takeaway was because he was keeping the forearms so shut. Now, at that point, the forearms did change direction in transition. Face angle gets wide open, so the toe of the club is hanging up and back here. Obviously, based on his wrist angles and his grip strength, that's not really doing him many favors. And then at this point, very, very common reaction from any golfer. When the face gets open, you're going to swing hard across the ball. So what you'll see is that he swings really down and left on his golf ball. Now, really, this is not the worst position I've ever seen, right? A lot of good, stability on the club face, if you really want to call it that. He's not turning the face over that much. But again, he's swinging really left because he has to, due to the face angle. So you end up seeing, that chicken wing in the follow through. He doesn't really have a lot of arm extension. He really could be much more efficient with his use of his hands and arms, in my opinion. And obviously we can get him loading a lot better in his backswing, but it's not the worst swing I've ever seen, especially for a recreational golfer. So I would give this a solid 6 on 10. I think there's a lot of really good pieces here that you can work with, but obviously it could be a lot more efficient.